I'm really excited to be starting this series on people, planet, and performance, and really looking specifically within the context of Africa. I am dialing in today in Bloemfontein in South Africa. Really a great opportunity to be doing this here, and really excited about the 7 series, the 7 episodes that are in this series. Today we're focusing specifically on environmental theater and climate justice in Africa. We're asking ourselves 2 questions: how did we get here, and how do we move forward? The series itself is really a broad-based, interdisciplinary, intercultural, and cross-sectoral exploration of climate emergency, climate crisis, and climate justice within the context of theater and performance, with a focus on Africa. We're going to be talking and engaging with artists, researchers, from Africa, whose work focus on Africa, and there's some that are not necessarily living on the continent, but their work really focus on climate issues on the continent. Special thanks to HowlRound for believing and trusting us on this journey. It's been always a great opportunity to partner and collaborate with HowlRound. Special thanks to Center for Sustainable Practice Within the Arts for the partnership, and of course to Center for Social Engaged Theatre, CEST, and to Theatre Industry International. This series is really set out to bring dynamic perspectives from Africa into already existing HowlRound's programming on climate emergencies. The reality is that issues of planetary crisis, sustainability within the arts, which has also been referred to as SATA, S-A-T-A, issues of climate justice, they are not peculiar to just one side of the world. We can all see now that these issues really bring all of us to the table because we're all affected. And we do know that the different stakeholders, different parastatals, from the international to the national to regional and local levels, they are doing everything they can to be able to address all of this. But we also want to center the artist. We want to center what artists have done, what they are doing, and how all these issues around climate justice and crisis that we have are informing the future of their work. So with me today in this first series, in this first episode, is Aliyah Kassam, and Aliyah is going to introduce herself. The work that Aliyah does is really fascinating because it centers storytelling. It centers not just only storytelling, but how those stories are being told to really bring to limelight all of these issues. So with that, I will light a call on Aliyah Kassam to introduce herself. Over to you, Aliyah.
Thank you so much, Taiwo. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation and the warm welcome. Good evening to all of you, wherever you are, or good morning, good afternoon. It's a cold, cold evening in Nairobi. We were chatting about how cold is relative because this is not cold for Canada, but in Nairobi, we are like in our blankets with our tea, and really, really experiencing how different the climate feels year upon year. My name is Alea Kasem. I am a Kenyan. I'm an African feminist, a storyteller, a writer, and a performer. I like to make things. My work is often ecofeminist in nature and works across disciplines and genres. I like to follow story. And if that story takes me to the stage, it may take me to the screen, it may take me to the speaker, it may take me to Twitter threads. I'm just really interested in the ways that people experience story. And I often explore the space between imagination and memory, using ritual as a way to access those realms. That's me as a practitioner, as an artistic practitioner personally. And in addition, I'm so proud of being a co-founder of a content studio called the Lamb Sisterhood. And we fill the world with stories for African women to feel seen, heard, and beloved. Our most precious project that we have ongoing right now is Cabrazen. Ka means sort of the small version. So it's like small brazen. And it sort of emerged from a theater show we did in 2018, Brazen, which was uninvisibling the lives of brazen Kenyan women from our history. And Cabrazen tells the stories of brazen African women for our little ones, reimagining these women through mythology, and created as a podcast. So that's me.
Thank you so much. Before I know you're going to do a rendition of one of your amazing poem that you've written. I like to really start this entire series and, of course, this episode by really highlighting two amazing environmental activists and activists. One of them is late Ken Saro-Wiwa. And my choice of both of them, I'm going to come to the second one, is for me really thinking in terms of how the future that they were living, this future that what we're living now, they lived it a long time ago. I am from Nigeria. I did learn about late Ken Saro-Wiwa many years ago. And I remember when I did one of my final projects during my undergrad days at the University of Jos in Plateau State, Nigeria. I directed a play called Killing the Swarm, and it was based on the story of late Ken Saro-Wiwa. Later on, would read a lot about him and his radio drama and all of the work that he did using the art, using storytelling to speak to powers that be about the extractivist ways of the cooperation, particularly with the Ogoni people, on the land of the Ogoni people, the Oloibiri, the corporations coming and just reaping their land. The second person I'd like to also highlight is one Professor Wangari Mutu Matai, and I know that your poem, you will speak more to that. Of course, I'm not from Kenya. And an amazing work that bodies of work, not just from a theoretical perspective, but I think one of the things that Professor Matai did open our eyes to is not just only critiquing the system, but working towards a future that we prefer. And her notion of tree planting and all of that. I do hope that in each series, in each episode, I'll be highlighting some of those artists who have used their work to be able to show us the way. And I think that's what hopefully that's what artists, and we're going to talk about that, artists are every day thinking and rethinking what the future should look like, a preferred, different version of. And so even for me as a researcher, as an artist researcher, I'm constantly reminded of that. With that, I'll pass it to you to give us this rendition, and then from there, would open up for us to be able to get onto the conversation. And for our listeners and viewers out there, please feel free to put in your chat questions, and we'll get to that as we move forward. Over to you, Miriam.
Thank you, Taiwo. Yeah, Wangari Maathai, I mean, for me, the enduring messages that she really embodied in everything she did was, do your little thing. Do the best that you can with your little thing, whatever that little thing is. So this poem I wrote a couple of years ago. We have a park in the city in Nairobi called Uhuru Park. Uhuru means freedom. And it's one of the few public green spaces in the city. And it's one that Wangari Maathai really fought for. And it holds a lot of memories. And Wangari Maathai and other women also. She was very clear about that. And what happened is, this is after she had passed a few years ago, there was an attempt to take part of the park to build an expressway through the park. And there was a protest held, and this poem was really written, in that moment, out of that space. Okay, here we go. It's called For Wangari Maathai at Uhuru Park. This soil here. Take a deep breath. This soil here holds our lungs. This soil here gives us breath. This soil here remembers a woman. This soil here remembers a woman who foolish men once called crazy. A woman crazy enough to understand that destroying the very thing that gives you breath is crazy. Because in 1989, this soil here was almost destroyed to create a business complex or a parking lot or an expressway to the airport. Now that is crazy. But this soil here remembers that woman who inspired other women to come together to protect this soil here and that soil there and the soil we don't even know about. This soil is proof of their victory. This soil is still imprinted with the feet of those women dancing a dance of victory. But this soil here holds shame. This soil remembers mothers. In 1982, women made this soil their home for 11 months in protest, in defiance, in refusal, in demand that their sons be released from illegal detainment. On this soil, they refused to eat. No freedom, no food. This soil here was drenched by their tears, stained by their blood, trampled by the boots of those who are meant to protect us. This soil here saw their naked bodies, mothers with no choice but to strip naked to save their children's lives. This soil here was witness to that curse. This soil here is witness to their power. This soil here remembers what happens when a government makes the mistake of ignoring women. This soil here remembers when promises are broken. This soil here couldn't care less if you're a Moheshimiwa. The soil here doesn't need to see your government ID card or expect you to have gone to school. This soil here is for you because of women. This soil here remembers her name, Wangari Maathai. this soil here is for you to be here in whatever way you need, whenever you need. This soil here is for you to lie down here and paint your dreams in the clouds, to close your eyes and remember that when you were a little girl and your late Nana Baba brought you to this soil here, the jacarandas had painted that soil there. Oh, this soil here is to take a moment here, to teach your daughter how to skip here, to rub the soil off your clothes when she falls down here. If you listen carefully, in this soil, you can hear whispered prayers and hearts breaking. You can hear so many different types of laughter. You can hear the hopes of a people who call this soil here home. This soil will remember today, and it will remember tomorrow. Thank you,
Thank you.
Taiwo.
Thank you. Thank you. It's when I read the poem, lot of imageries, right? A lot of historical context. And I guess my first question is, and this is a big question, in your thoughts, how did we get here?
It's such a good question. And when you say here, do you mean existentially here, or like just here in all the ways that here means?
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, this is a question that my work and a lot of my peers, we seek to answer because our history has been denied from us, you know, both in terms of, you know, what happened, you know, before colonialism, what colonialism did to us, and also for those of us who live in countries where we're living in an extension of colonial power structures. You know, we're still with those histories are still invisible. And so there's such a seeking and a yearning to understand, how did we get here? Because if we can understand how we got here, then we might be able to see what a way out might look like. And you know, Brazen, which I spoke of, you know, the work that we do with the Lamb Sisterhood, specifically looks at, you know, the stories that African women might have to contribute to this discourse, because those stories are also often invisible. And because there's a point of view that is held that is important to keep in mind. So when you think of, when I think of the Wangari Maathai poem, you know, what I was really trying to think about is how the earth holds memory. The earth holds memory beyond our individual, beyond this moment. It holds memory, and also it holds judgment. It's not, I don't know what the word is, but what we do has an impact on it. And I mean, that's so clear and so obvious. And yet when you're divorced from a relationship with the earth, only then can you extract in ways that you don't understand that that behavior has an influence and an impact on the earth now and in the future.
Interesting. You know, it's part of the objectives of this entire series is to highlight the remarkable work that has happened, works, you know, artworks, artists and practitioners, what they've done in the past and what they continue to do to highlight their work. And whether it's from Zimbabwe and the challenges that each of these countries within the context of Africa, obviously 54 countries, and its implication for those in the diaspora, how we're experiencing the impact of this existential crisis that we find ourselves. But beyond that, it's also to celebrate. When I read that poem, there's something that it arouses something on the inside of me, for me to know that many of my forefathers, foremothers, and those that have gone ahead of us, they've been fighting this fight before now. So it's not a 21st century phenomena, or it's not a Western idea and somebody becomes the star of this conversation. I want to come back based on that in your own work and the work of others, whether your peers or those that are not, we know that climate change and these existential issues are here to stay. And it's impacting us, like you rightly said. How are they passing that across in their work? And of course, in your own work too.
Yeah. I think there's various spaces where practitioners are influencing, practitioners are creating art. I think you have, and we have a long lineage, like a long history of this, of community theater, which is, hyper local in languages that the communities that you are part of and are going to, theater that springs out from the community, that speaks to what the community is experiencing. And so an example of this is Safe Pwani in the coastal region of Kenya, that is asking the very question of how did we get here? And they're looking at kind of where did we go wrong? What can we do differently? And they're also thinking about, so that it takes like a 40-year span from 1981 to 2030, I think. So that's longer than 40 years, 50 years to 2030. Looking at how theater can be a mirror to everyday life. And I think that what's happening a lot is we're very equipped because of these structures to have conversations about climate resilience. And I think we saw this also during COVID, there's an innate collective structure that we have in a lot of, I'll speak for Kenya, and I think it's possibly, you can extend it across the continent for a large part, which is to say that we understand that we're in this together. And so, even when COVID hit, we had ways that we were able to take care of one another very quickly because those structures were in place. And I think because we dealt, in Kenya, we dealt with the HIV/AIDS crisis through the 80s, community theater was really influential and important in helping guide people towards new ways of living. And I can see that already that's happening with climate, but it's very practical. It's very, because if you're a farmer in Bungoma, like you're dealing with the realities of the climate change on a day-to-day basis with your livelihood. And the theater is an opportunity to kind of have conversations on that level. And then you have another level where you have theater practitioners across the world having conversations with one another. And I think, for example, climate change theater, I think, is it called Climate Change Action for Theater?
Yeah.
Theater action. Exactly. Is a great example of that, because you look at all the different, they commission 50 artists, 50 playwrights around the world to write 5-minute or 10-minute plays, and then these can be put on by organizations around the world. And and what you end up having is really a global theater conversation that's centered around climate. The third one is one that I'm also very interested in, which is calling truth to power. Because theater is hyper local, just by its very nature. What's happening is we're having a lot of these conversations here. But the people who have power, just by virtue of how this world is structured, and who truthfully are the ones who are kind of leading the damage. The discourse is very much concentrated by their thinking. There's very little space for people who don't fit into that type of narrative. And again, this is sort of why the Lamb Sisterhood does the work we do, which is how can we amplify the voices of African women in this. And I think, you know, we have practices that, and, you know, Taiwo, you and I were talking a little bit about this earlier. You know, we have indigenous practices that we've been carrying out for generations that are very smart, very effective, very impactful ways of being in relationship with the earth. And I think there's a role that theater has to center those voices. And actually, I think it's the people in the West that needs to hear this, because there's always a sense of like, development theater, take it to Africa, teach the Africans how to deal with the climate. Well, I'd say actually we're doing pretty damn well. If anybody could benefit with some knowledge, I think it's the other way.
That's right.
And what that's going to require is it's going to require very deliberate funding of to enable those voices to be amplified, and it's going to require listening, very deliberate listening. Yeah.
Thank you. I do hear you, and I do agree. I think there need to be, let's say, an overhaul of the strategy, of the methodology, that it's not from one pole to the other, but that it should be both. It should be from these entities and vice versa. Yeah. And we're sort of moving into the next big question of the way forward. But I want to just spend some time on the question: how did we get here? You've touched on some couple of things, you know, from colonization to the neoliberal practices, to the impact of globalization, to how cooperation constantly extract, to the culture of consumption, overconsumption that has been built into the system, which thanks to capitalism, and all of these big words that we can talk about them in clear terms now. How the power of capital, the power of profit making, the power of industries and cooperation, how they have effect on our day to day. One of the things that late Ken Saro-Wiwa was really, you know, adamant about is how, while all these corporations come to Nigeria to extract, which is happening these days, go to Congo DR, Congo DC, you see extraction, mining. We keep talking about, you know, we want to move away from fossil fuel. And then the reality is that even if we want to move into, you know, other kinds of, you know, power generation systems, we still need power, we still need raw materials, and those raw materials most of them are really from Africa. All right, is it the extraction in Ghana of gold? It's always extraction. Yeah. Always extraction. Yeah. But I want to go back to that point, because you're centering us. The poem is foregrounding what all of these, you know, artists and activists are saying, that we need to pay attention to the land. Yes. Alia, in your own thought, in what ways are our own indigenous ideas, and when I say indigenous, I mean our own way of being, our own ideologies and perspectives, really keep us grounded in some of this key thinking that help us or help those in the past? Because I would also say that for some of us, you know, with the introduction to the Western education and those things, we're beginning to move away from those practices. In your own way, sorry, from your perspective, how are those thinking and ideas keep us rooted in this thinking about our connection to the land, to the planet, and how are these helping us, or have they helped us in the past to build this resilience that you rightly mentioned in Iran?
You know, I think it really comes down to this word relationship. You know, relationship with the earth. A relationship is one that goes two ways. I think it's understanding, when you extract, that speaks to a certain type of relationship, which, is not, I mean, even leave aside the fact that it's not serving us. I think it's fundamentally devastating, actually. I think the word that you used, practice, is a beautiful word, Taiwo, because I think part of it lies in that word. And one of the things that African feminists teach me is to do whatever you can from the space that you inhabit to affect the people that you're in community with. There's a way in which the climate conversation can feel extremely overwhelming. You feel like you're a tiny cog in a big wheel and you have no control over it. It's something I personally have been grappling with. There's also an understanding that, we contribute, I think the continent contributes to a fraction, I think it's less than 1% of the emissions that have led to this. We are inherently recyclers, inherently. It's just built into how we are, right? There's ways that work already for us very hard. So number one, I think it's to recognize, acknowledge these practices. I find a lot of people really also finding great value in talking to their grandparents, in talking to the ones who came before us, and kind of unearthing those histories. Because there's a way that those practices have been either diminished or vilified. And when you bring them out and you look at them and you say, this has value, this is not just foi, it is a valuable practice to have. For me, for Wangari Maathai, it was planting a tree. An indigenous tree has value. The indigenous tree is not about, what am I going to do with this tree? What purpose is this tree going to solve? Will it give me, can I cut it for firewood? Can I, no, it wasn't just about that, right? I think there's a conversation Kenya's having right now around seeds and GMOs, and the fact that, we, in a lot of communities, we kept seed. We kept a ton of indigenous seed and we shared them with one another. And what's going to happen if the GMO seeds come is not only are they going to take over, essentially colonize the land, because then it will be inhospitable for local seed, which means that we're tied to these systems, these power systems, and you're taking agency away from the farmers. But you're also interfering with the earth. The earth likes diversity. It doesn't like single crop, right? It doesn't, we were talking, Taiwo, you were saying earlier how there was a practice of allowing land to rest, for 7 years, before you plant it again. And what really struck me as you were saying this is, as humans, we also need to rest. We're in an environment that is so hyper productive focused. We're burning out, we're exhausted. This practice of letting the land rest extends even to how we are in the world. I don't know if this is answering your question.
No, I think it does. I love that you're recentering the idea of practice and stories, that when we bring these stories out there, we're not just identifying and reasserting our identity, but we're also putting in place, letting people know that there is a reason why we do this. Doing the practice itself, it's like planting this, the tree, for example. It's not because I want to chop it down to eat or to do anything. It's because there is, for us as African, or whatever, I mean, African is a big term, obviously, but we're interested in having a close relationship with the land, a relationship of not extracting and reaping and destroying, but that we're in partnership with Mother Earth, with the planet, to build together. And I think that our practices reflect that, the kind of relationship that we bring into, and that's our worldview, right? And we're not saying that, everything is perfect, the practices are great, no, but that in what ways do we need to start amplifying those practices? Because I do hear you, the Center for Sri Language Theatre is at the University of Regina in Canada. And a major part of our discourse and, in the context of Canada, and I think in part of the US and recently in the Nordic region, is indigeneity, and of course, Australia, how we need to start recentering, the indigenous practices, ways of doing things and different things like that. And I think that that's what you're saying here, is that the moment we are okay with our work, our practices, really creating space for people to know who we are, sharing stories about our people, sharing stories why, this place matter, sharing story where our stories are speaking truth to powers that be, sharing stories of resistance, sharing all of these things. There is something inherent. That's what I'm hearing you say. There is something powerful in that. So when I was growing up, the case of the seed, and when you said the picture just flashed, I remember, you during harvest time, you get seeds, and then there's a way that you preserve those seeds. You put it on the firewood and it, it heat it up. You go to the villages and you see that, so that during the planting season, it's those seeds, whether corn or, whatever, it's those seeds that you take to the farm to plant that. But the moment genetically modified organism, GMO, comes into place, it's going to make all of that, it's going to silence it because it becomes mechanized, right? Now, it changes again, you see, it changes the relationship you're talking about. That practice changes the relationship. So anyway, I'm just commenting on everything.
And I think theater really has a role to play in moving, in like sharing the stories. You mentioned, stories of resistance. The idea that, we are not the first, stand on shoulders of many who have been on this path, and to know that, to take pride in it, to take strength from it, and to learn from it, right? To work across difference, to, as Dr. Keguro Macharia really talks about, working across difference. And again, another thing he says is, how do you imagine freedom? That's another thing theater can do, is, imagine. What does it look like for us? That's the role of artists, imagine. This idea, so again, my practice really is often from a very sort of Kenyan storytelling lineage, which is a very collective form. There's no fourth wall. There's no passive audience. The audience is shaping the story in as much as the storyteller is conveying the story. The storyteller is a vessel and the audience shapes it, And I think the power of that is you're also reminded that we're in this earth together. We are shaping one another's experience and the experience for the future generations together. There is no passivity. There is no me here performing at you, you politely clapping, it was a wonderful experience, I'm going back. It is demanding in a way that I think a lot of our storytelling traditions historically are. And were that way with intention, because the very form of them also spoke to what they were trying to achieve.
Yeah. I want to kind of just steer us towards the second question, which we'll dwell on, and we're going to bring this to a close very soon. But I just want to highlight that if folks have questions, please type it. We'll get it, and the captioning is happening. So and of course our ASL interpreters are there, Victor and Tanya. So thank you for doing that. I should have said that right at the beginning. So that's me putting just shout out to folks who are really helping us behind the scene. Thank you so much. I want to come to the question of the way for the forward thinking. Lot of the time, and you did say this earlier, that when we talk about the issues of climate change, planetary crisis, and all of that, it can be, it can put this fear into us. One, two, it's also this guilt of, and for good, for bad. I think that times are that also good in some ways, and maybe to help us. But I don't believe in narrative of fear, because it's where there is perfect love, it casts out fear, right? And we can't live in fear. We've seen that happen, in different spaces, political leaders who just come out with fear narrative and just to put people into their shackles, basically. But the power of theater, the power of performance, and broadly conceived, like you mentioned, is the opportunity to re-imagine, to look ahead, to bring out all of these things that we're talking about. I'd like you to speak more about that, particularly not just only your work, but the work that you've seen, or colleagues that you've worked with or you've heard about, whether in Kenya or that part of the continent, or maybe they're not even on the continent, but their work speaks to all of this.
Yeah. I was reading the other day about this South African theatre project called Listen to the Sea, Lalela Ulwandle. And it was developed, I think, by the Empa Theatre Group. And it's really about listening to the voices of coastal dwellers. I think there's what I found really, what really struck me about that piece and about the work that they're doing is really this concept of listening. I think artists are listeners to begin with. And I think perhaps the challenge for us is to be more deliberate about how we're listening and who we're listening to. I think we need to really listen to the voices who are deliberately silenced, because we have a role in centering those voices and in making sure they are heard. In the same way, for example, and I think this is again an example that we can take, that we can look at is during COVID, the first couple of years, disability activists really talked about how we were entering a mass disabling event, and they were ignored for the most part. And we're seeing that that is what is happening now. If we were to have mainstreamed, if we had taken, if they had been taken seriously, what might the world look like differently now? And so I think as artists, again, first it's to listen deliberately, generously, and widely. I think it's to remember, Mariam Kaba says, hope is a discipline. So it's to actively remember that, again, discipline requires practice. It's an active, it's not passive. And finally, I think, and this is a story, Wangari Maathai, it's a beautiful story Wangari Maathai used to tell about the hummingbird. Have you heard it, Taiwo? The story of the hummingbird?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Beautiful. Yes, I have. Yes.
And so for the purpose of anyone listening who may not have heard it, this is a very contracted version, but I encourage you to go look for it online. It's beautiful the way she tells it. There's a fire breaks out in the forest and everybody's frightened. Nobody knows what to do. And the hummingbird goes and starts, drop at a time in her little beak, pulling water from the river and putting it on the fire. And all the other animals are like, what are you doing? This is crazy. And she's like, I'm doing the best I can. And I think that is our compass. What does doing the best you can look like for you in every moment? To ask yourself that in all the roles that you play in life. And I think it's to think about what's the little thing that you can do. And I think it's, it's to, and that's of course both on an artistic level, but also on a human level.
Mm.
I don't think the future is good. I don't think we're not going to be saved by Greta. It's not a single person that's going to save us. I mean, I think that's very clear. This is going to require all of us together
Mm.
in community. And that's going to require listening to each other and working across, difference.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you for that. I think that the story of the hummingbird just speaks to when we talk about thinking globally and acting locally and personally. The time I read it, the first time I read it, I'm like, this is really interesting because when we were growing up, back in the day, in the morning, even if you have wall clock in the house or not, a cock is going to crow.
Yeah.
And when the cock crow, that means the day has broken. Wake up. Of course, I don't hear that again because of, everything where we're at in the world. But it goes to the fact that the crow is doing its own part. And that crow is not going to be heard in the UK or in the US or in Canada. It's going to be heard right in the household or around. And so reading, and I'm just weaving those threads together. If this nature, these are not human beings. These are nature around us that are teaching us. And in addition to what you said is, I think at times we also need to move. We also need to look into the nature that is being given to us, because there's so much to learn from that. In fact, I think that it will teach us to listen deeply, respectively, and in a way that is reciprocal. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Deeply appreciate that, Aliyah. We have 6 more episodes to go, and we're going to be diving. This first episode, we've unearthed so many things that we're going to be following up in the remaining episodes. From second episode is on echo theater, decolonizing the colonized narrative. We're going to be looking into retooling green tool for theater in Africa, just looking at highlight from practitioners. We're also going to be looking at responses to climate crisis and emergencies, storytelling from the performing arts, and really looking at the kind of stories that are promoting the resilience we talked about. We'll also take a look at eco themes and in climate action. And then finally, we're also going to be looking at the intersection of performance and climate finance, sustainability, because I think those things are really very critical and very important. Before we bring this to an end, I just wanted to know if we have any question. I've not seen any. So just a minute, if there's any question, happy to answer that. But if there's none, I just wanted to pass it on to Aliyah. Any last thoughts, final thoughts before we bring this to an end from your end?
Well, I think final thoughts. I think about, and this isn't, again, in any way related to theater as such, but it reminds me again of this practice, a little small that you can do. On Twitter, there's a practice of a very small community that shares photos of flowers every day, and sharing beauty essentially. And I think that there's real value in taking moments to appreciate, to look, appreciate, acknowledge, observe what is around us. Because that's, I think, how one of the ways that relationship can form, which is to say that a thing existing as it is beautiful, and I don't need to pick the flower, and I don't need to do anything to that flower, but to notice it and to thank it. It sounds cheesy, but I think that's one of the ways to cultivate relationship is to really notice, to make mindful efforts to notice what is around you without needing to take it.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you so much. This is great. Noticing, not necessarily with the aim of taking it or reaping it, but really to notice and acknowledge and breathe in. This is great. If there are no questions, I'd like to bring this to an end by saying thank you so much for being here, and to our viewers and those that will see this later. I think today we've sort of started this series on this note of honing on to some of the histories around climate advocacy and activism on the continent. We highlighted some works that artists are doing, including Aliyah, who has graciously even presented and performed a poem for us. We also hone on to this idea of practice. We're really saying that we need to amplify those practices that are, and those are practices that are helping us to reiterate our identity, ways of doing things as a people, and they need to really listen. They need to really listen deeply to one another, but beyond us, to everything around us. I'd like to once again thank HowlRound for creating this platform for us to do this. Thanks to Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts. And of course, thanks to Center for Social Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina, where I serve as a Canada Research Chair in Social Engaged Theatre. I'm the director and an assistant professor there. And thanks to Theatre Ministry International, theatre partner who are based in Nigeria and Canada. And and thanks to all of you for being here. So we're looking forward to engaging with you again in the next episode, which is going to happen next week. And then we're focusing on, eco-theater decolonizing the colonized narrative. I believe that we have Ogutu Muraya, hopefully I'm pronouncing that name correctly, and Jehoshaphat Phillips Sabar. I believe those are our two guests for that episode. And so, and thanks to our ASL interpreters, Victor and Tanya, and of course to Ben, who is a captioner. With that, thank you so much, everyone. Do have a lovely day, and I'm signing out from Bloemfontein, South Africa. Bye, everyone.